Good day. Welcome to Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com. I'm John Marino. We are produced by Sharc Creative, and we are made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through the spring of 2021. Lipolis Electric. Don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis. Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and White Plains Hospital, thanks to our heroes at White Plains Hospital and all the healthcare facilities and hospitals around our tri-state area for all they've done throughout our COVID-19 pandemic. This is the Cup of Joe political show. We are joined by our good friend, the State Assemblyman representing the 92nd District in Westchester, which encompasses the town of Greenburgh, a number of the river towns along the Hudson River, and part of the town of Mount Pleasant. Tom Abinanti, welcome back to Westchester Talk Radio.
Nice to see you, John. I every time I see you in person on Zoom, you look so different than you used to when we were on the radio.
Yeah, a little different, right? I've heard about that. So, yeah, and different than each time because they keep losing weight. I think when
I'm just saying, I'm actually seeing your face, not just your voice.
Here we are, and I see you too. You remember the days when you stopped by from time to time at WFAS in White Plains back in the 90s. You and George Latimer were frequent in stopping by whenever you were in the area to sit down and say hi and sit down with us at that time. Then we
moved to the phone interviews.
Yes,
and,
we did.
All I saw was the other end of the telephone.
Yep, and now here we are on Zoom. The pandemic brought us indoors, and we kind of like it like this. Tom, I know it's been a trying time in Albany and around the area the past year. Instead of things seemingly moving back in a normal direction, things get a bit more strange and unique as the days go on. First of all, give us the COVID update for Westchester. Do you see us rounding the corner and beating this thing finally?
Eventually, we will beat this, but every time we round the corner, we see another corner ahead. It's very frustrating. To do this right, we need to have the cooperation of everyone. Everyone has to continue to socially distance, to continue to wear a mask, and not let your guard down. Because every time we think we're going in the right direction, a hotspot pops up, and then that hotspot spreads. And we get overconfident because the numbers are low again. I'm not sure what today's number is, but it's a little lower than yesterday's number. But we went up again and down again and up again. So I think we're going in the right direction. We're also hopeful that with enough people getting the vaccines, that the infection rate will drop. Unfortunately, we still don't know what the impact on the transmission rate will be with the vaccines. There are reports that people can still catch COVID, not get sick because they took the vaccines, but transmit it to somebody else if they come into contact with that person soon after they came into contact with the person who gave them the COVID. So, we don't know yet. Hopefully that's not going to be the case. Hopefully these vaccines will inoculate people against being able to carry the vaccine, the COVID virus to someone else. But apparently this is all still being studied. So the only advice we can give is keep being careful. The CDC is talking about the day when we can have groups of vaccinated family members get together. I'm hopeful that we can do that. I don't join in the criticism of the governor who has been trying to keep people safe. I have lots of other criticisms of him, and I'm sure we'll get to them later. But I think he has provided the inspiration that is necessary to people to pay attention to their conduct and try to help damp down the spread of COVID. This seems to be a very, very strange virus. We hear reports of old people and young people dying from COVID. And then we hear reports of people having long-term effects from COVID, even if they had a mild case. Then we hear about all of the people, the vast, vast majority who got COVID and no impacts, didn't get sick. And that gives people the misleading sense of, well, this isn't serious. It is serious. If you're a person who gets it and you get a bad case of it, it's serious. Look at all the people who've died. We've had people in nursing homes die. We have otherwise healthy people who are in group homes. where there was a spread of the infection who have died. These are adults who are healthy. Now, many people in group homes are not healthy. They have comorbid conditions, but there are a lot of them that are very healthy, but they, got it and died. So these are case studies that we can look at. It's a little more difficult than looking at the general. It's a little easier than looking at the general population. A little more difficult to look at the general population. But when you look at the nursing home population, the disparate impact, a lot of people at nursing homes died, but some of them were very healthy, and some of them who were sick managed to live through COVID. So I don't think the scientists have figured out what this is all about yet. So the only thing we can do is protect ourselves. Just don't become too confident. Continue to be careful, and follow the guidance that comes down from the CDC and the state health department.
How effective has the vaccine rollout been in Westchester as far as you see it?
Well, I think that the governor has jumped the gun here by adding too many people to the list of those who can get it. My feeling is that you've got to target certain groups first. You've got to get your first responders first. Then you've got to get the people who are most likely to be exposed to it next. That's your teachers. That's your frontline people who are your delivery people, the people who work in supermarkets and all. Those are the people who are coming into contact with lots of other people. And by constantly expanding the group of people who are entitled to get a vaccine, we've overwhelmed the system. There are not that many vaccines coming into the system yet. Let's remember back to the summertime when the reports were that the President of the United States, the then president, was refusing to ramp up the vaccine production, who was still calling this whole thing a sham. Well, we've had, what is it in this country, 50,000 people die? Is that the number? No.
Thereabouts.
No, it's 500,000 people. 500,000, yeah. Right, 50,000 in New York, 500,000 in the country. So for them, it was serious. So we're still suffering the effects of that. Now, the current president, Joe Biden, is trying to ramp up production. But we are still not getting enough vaccines in New York or in any state to be able to vaccinate all of those people who want to be vaccinated immediately. Now, there's a little bit of pushback.
We're going to have total vaccination of adults by the end of May. The number right now is still under 10%. Here we are, middle of March. Is that doable by the end of May?
If we get more vaccines, yes. But at the moment, at the rate we're getting vaccines, it's not doable. So, I encourage people, if you're on the list and you feel healthy and you feel comfortable about it, get out there and get the vaccines. I think we still have to find out. Look, there's a little bit of pushback by some people. Look, my aunt called. She's 90 years old. And she said, my daughter's telling me I maybe shouldn't get the vaccine, et cetera. And I said, why not? I said, you were the prime candidate for this. You're 90 years old. You're healthy. You don't want to catch COVID. You don't want to get sick. We'd like to keep you around for a while longer. Why would you not get the vaccine? Now, I have some questions which I don't think they've addressed, and I think they have to. What about people who have very serious allergies? What about people who have had bad reactions to other vaccines? I believe that that the CDC and our health department has to study these specific circumstances and give doctors guidance on who should not take the virus vaccine. If we were to get that kind of guidance, I don't think you'd find any pushback. And I do believe that there are some people who are susceptible to a serious negative reaction. But it's not going to be the number of people who are now refusing to take vaccines. Nobody wants to be that one in 30 million. I think the numbers are 30 in a million or something like that. The flu vaccine has an adverse reaction, I read somewhere, of 1 in a million. This vaccine is 30 in a million. Now, that's a minuscule number of people, except to one of those 30 people. So I think we've got to identify better who those people are and let them either take the vaccine in a hospital where you can have an immediate reaction to any negative reaction, or just tell them, hey, guys, stay safe, but don't take the vaccine. But we have a large number of people right now who are refusing to take the vaccine because they're afraid. And I don't think the health authorities are doing a good job in explaining to them that they shouldn't be afraid. And I think we need a better job of doing it. It's not enough to just say, don't worry, it's a minuscule number of people. That doesn't answer the question for the people who are afraid.
Right.
But we really do. We have this tool. We now have 3 different ones, and we're probably going to have more. And from what we can see around the world, it helps. It helps tamp down this, and it helps keep people safe. So we need to encourage people to go out there when your turn comes. Go get the vaccine.
Now, it's budget time in Albany. It's due April 1st, as it is every year. Past few years, I think the legislature has made it a focal point to make sure this gets done on April 1st. We have some questions now as to whether or not that's going to be the case this year. The biggest question amongst all of this is the fate, the future of Governor Andrew Cuomo, as you alluded to a few minutes ago. You are calling for his resignation. Why?
Look, what I've seen over the years is that people's strengths are also their weaknesses if they can't control those strengths. The governor has a very assertive, aggressive personality. He is well known as a bully. He gets things done by pushing people around, not by saying please. That was a strength at the beginning of the COVID pandemic when we had no leadership from Washington, and he became the face of government, trying to calm people down and talk them through this pandemic when people were very, very afraid. But that personality comes out in different ways, some of them negative. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal last weekend, which confirmed what those of us in government who worked with this man and his administration know. He's a tyrant. He pushes everybody, including his own staff, people that he comes in contact with, and he's very assertive and aggressive. Now, a subset of that is not only is he yelling at his staff and with a zero tolerance approach, he also has no self-control, it appears, that when he's dealing with women, particularly young women. And he doesn't seem to either have the social graces, the state of mind, or doesn't care that he asks women personal questions. And when you take a look at the rules on defining sexual harassment, for an employer to ask an employee personal sexual questions that make her feel uncomfortable, that is sexual harassment by definition.
He violate his own standards then.
Correct. He signed a law that requires employers to set down standards. He set down standards in compliance with the law. He violated his own standards, and he admitted that he violated those standards.
He apologized.
Yes, he apologized. Well, an apology is not sufficient to wipe out the crime. As somebody said, if you're a bank robber, it's not enough to apologize and give back the money. You know, you committed the crime, you got to do the time. And the penalty here for an employer should be that that employer gets removed.
Now, he says he was elected by the people of New York and let the people decide next time he runs for governor. Yet there have been 6 instances in which this governor has had people under his employ be in the same situation. They were all pretty much gone immediately. Most notably, his call for one-time Attorney General Eric Schneiderman to step down a few years ago when allegations against him popped up. Andrew Cuomo says this situation involving him is different. That's why he should not step down. What in his mind is different about this?
I don't see anything different about it. The Eric Schneiderman case was the Cuomo rule, zero tolerance. And in Schneiderman's case, the allegations were of violence. Basically, there was some charges that he had slapped a girlfriend or something like that, if I remember correctly. Right. But it was not job related. He was not misusing his position as Attorney General. And the governor's argument at the time was the Attorney General has lost faith. He can't prosecute cases like these types of things anymore. He can't properly represent the state. Everybody's lost faith in him. He's got to go. He wasn't even misusing his office. The allegations against the governor are that he's created a toxic work environment. And he created that environment in the people's government. That these allegations would not be possible but for the fact that he is the governor. Mm-hmm. He called on assembly members when they were charged with sexual harassment to leave immediately. Zero tolerance. You're out of here. Well, they weren't even, they weren't the governor. They weren't running big offices. So the Cuomo rule is zero tolerance. Basically, in his mind, a charge is equivalent to a conviction. Now, I don't believe that. I believe in due process, just like the governor said there should be due process.
But there's the rules.
Right, but he sets the rules. Now, there's a distinction between a process where someone else is charging you and where there's going to be a trial versus the public reaction saying, we've lost confidence in you, it is time for you to leave. The people that I am hearing from who want him to stay appear to be pushed by some kind of a political effort on behalf of the governor. They don't deal with the charges. They misstate what the charges are. I mean, the governor keeps saying, I didn't touch anybody, I didn't touch anybody, I didn't touch anybody. Okay, so you're saying that you didn't commit a crime. But nobody's, at this point, asking you to leave because you committed the crime. We're saying you are distracted and you are a distraction, and the charges are there by 6 different independent women, and there's talk of more coming out. And we understand that this sexual harassment charge is not inconsistent with the way you've acted with respect to other people. The difference is your toxic environment here is that you are using your position as governor to call in underlings. You're a 60-something-year-old man. You're talking to 20-something-year-old women, and you're asking them about their sex life, and you're asking them if they've ever had sex with a man your age. What's the implication here? This is, and you haven't denied this. Mm-hmm. So what's your defense? Your defense is you didn't touch them, while some of them claim that you did. Well, that's irrelevant to the conversation, whether you touched them. That's the next step.
Anna Ruck, where he did touch her face.
Right. Well, we saw that picture, yes. Yeah. And he's saying, well, that's comforting. That's not comforting. That's an act of dominance. When somebody grabs you by the face and you can't walk away, that's dominance. That's not comforting. All right. That's very different than comforting. I understand what comforting is. It's when my aunt, who should take the vaccines, comes up and hugs me and grabs me and won't let go until she gets a kiss. Okay, well, that's my aunt, and I understand that. And we've been doing that since I was 6 years old, or actually 1 year old. So, I understand that. But there's a family relationship there. The governor is not related to any of these people. He's the superior. He's the governor. And people are afraid to pull away. People are afraid to push back.
He says he learned his style from his father, Mario Cuomo, that Mario did the same thing when he was.
I don't think we've ever heard any charges that Mario Cuomo was sexually harassing anyone. Okay, the circumstances are important. Now the governor says, well, let's wait for the
investigation.
The investigation. What is the report going to show? If he leaves, that ends things and we can get back to work. If he doesn't, then we get a report and he wants due process. Well, then he's actually asking us to impeach him. That's what he's saying. He wants. I don't understand it, because that's where you get the due process. And we'd have to hire staff. We'd have to hold hearings. We'd have to take a vote on the legislature, a majority vote. He would then be removed from office temporarily while the Senate considered having a trial. And then you need 2/3 of the senators to remove him permanently. Does he really want to go through all of that? Is that what he's asking for? Because now you're talking about a formal process where there will be due process. But what we're saying here is, look, Governor, there are allegations that your administration hid information with respect to nursing homes, and that you did so at the admission of your top staff person to avoid giving information to the federal prosecutors. That's a serious allegation, okay? Secondly, there are people out there who are very upset with the way you dealt with the nursing homes, and they're charging that you are responsible for thousands of deaths because you sent people with COVID back into nursing homes. I have the same question with respect to people with disabilities. The order is still out there. If you get COVID, you ought to go back to your group home. Really? We're telling people who live in crowded quarters to not go home, to go somewhere else. Don't go home and infect your family. So it's okay.
So why, after all of this, is this order still out there at this point?
I don't know. I've asked that question.
It was rescinded back last May.
It was not.
It got put back again. But
no.
Still out there?
The nursing home order was rescinded, but the group home order is still there.
Still there. Okay.
Okay. That's his disrespect for people with disabilities. That's very clear, but that's a whole other issue. So you've got those two issues, and now it's come up. I just came from a telephone call, a Zoom call the Thruway Authority, there's an allegation that there was a cover-up of some improper materials being used, insufficient materials being used on the Mario Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge.
Right, which is a story broken by Brandon Lyons up in Albany at the Times-Union a couple of days ago.
Correct. And the answers were very much unsatisfactory. All we got was, believe us, we've done the proper studies. There was a lawsuit. The judge sealed the file. We can't talk about it. Well, that's a total misinterpretation of a sealing order by a judge. And to me, it's just part of a cover-up. If there's nothing wrong, well, then let's talk about it. Let's see the engineering reports. Let's have some discussion. Let's make the public officials feel comfortable so we can support your position, not have doubts about your position, and inquire further and make it look like the governor's involved in another cover-up. So when you put all of this together, plus what we hear about the toxic working environment, people should not be afraid to work for the state government. We want good people to work for the state government, not flee the state government because of a toxic environment.
Right. You want the best and brightest in Albany.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
We don't want them chased away because the chief executive might walk into your office and start to yell at you. I mean, that's not what we want. So when you put all of this together, and then you add to that the charges of sexual harassment, which he really hasn't denied. Okay, he hasn't denied the elements. You look at this and you say, how can we continue to have this man as the face of the Democratic Party in New York and as the face of New York to the rest of the world?
So we have now more than 24 lawmakers in Albany coming out, Democrats saying the governor must go. We have a group of about 20 women who came out and said, no, let's wait for the results of the investigation. That's kind of a push at that point.
Yes, it is. But wait, look, the leader of the Senate, Andrea Cousins, who was very reserved in her approach to
right.
She finally came out and said
many years. Your colleague from Yonkers, state Senate majority leader. Yep.
Nobody would claim that
the governor.
Correct. Nobody would claim that Andrea is a wide-eyed rebel. Okay.
Right.
I mean, she's a very responsible public official who takes her position seriously, and who studies her position and gauges the wishes of her Democratic conference. Mm-hmm. And she's come out and said it's time for him to leave. He ought to resign. Well, she said actually
they had a conversation a few days ago in which the governor basically verbally flipped her off and said, "Want me out? Go ahead and impeach me." And that, I think, shows exactly where this standoff is at this point, that if he doesn't have the respect of an Andrea Stewart Cousins or even a Carl Hastie, your leader in the Assembly, the Assembly Majority Leader, coming out and not using the words resign, but in so many words saying, I think it's time for Andrew Cuomo to step down. Where does this leave the state of New York in the middle of all of this? Because it's us who get caught.
Yeah, it's very difficult. We're trying very hard to do our job. At this time of year, we work double time because we are in a session. And then after the session, we work for 4, 5, 6 hours reviewing the budget with our staff, asking questions, sending them back. And then we come back for another round with recommendations. And then we go through those recommendations and say, yes, we like these. No, we don't. Go do these. All with the eye of producing an assembly resolution, a one-house resolution setting forth our position on the budget, which we're hoping to do 1 week from this conversation that you and I are having now. And so then what happens is we go into negotiations with the other house, with the Senate, and with the governor. Now, this is a very time-consuming process, and you're dealing with a $195 billion budget. I think that's the number for this year, depending on what monies you include and don't include and whatever. And we're also dealing with a very complex situation, trying to understand what it is the federal government is doing to help us. We've had several different stimulus bills by different names, and they're all different. They all have different requirements. Some of the money comes to the state, some goes to local governments, into school districts, into hospitals. It's very, very complex. So we're trying to put all of this together. And now at the same time, there was a demand by the public, by a lot of people, saying, you gave the governor extraordinary powers last year to deal with the pandemic. It is time to end those powers and have democracy return to New York State. Mm-hmm. Now, that's an interesting way of putting it, but that's what a lot of people were saying.
Westchester Assemblyman Tom Abinanti here with us on the Cup of Joe political show, Westchester Talk Radio. Tom, as we move along in this budgetary process, go ahead and pick up on where you left off.
Okay, well, last year at this time, at the urging of the governor, the legislature gave the governor enhanced extraordinary powers. Every governor has inherent powers as the executive. In addition to that, in New York, as in many states, there's an emergency provision in the law that says if the governor can declare a disaster. And if the governor declares a disaster for 30 days, the governor has certain extraordinary powers to waive laws and to do certain things in addition to waiving laws. You may remember George Pataki when we had the 9/11 crisis,
right?
Canceled the New York City primary and rescheduled it.
Correct.
There is some question whether he had the power to reschedule it or whether he should have come to the legislature. He had the power to cancel it. That's clear. Okay, but nobody objected when he rescheduled it. They said, okay, fine, legislature is not in session. You picked a good date, we'll all go along with that. But that demonstrates that the governor has inherent powers. What we did in the March legislation of last year was to specifically state that the governor could issue directives, in effect, replacement for law. So there was no question that he could set the date of a new primary if he cancels one, which he did. Now, I voted against that. I believe that we could have called the legislature in to do things like set the new primary date. Let him cancel it, and then come to the legislature and say, I need an immediate reaction on this. I need you to set a new primary date. Here's the legislation. Please pass it. I believe that's the way we should have gone. And I would have voted for an enhancement of the health commissioner's powers, not the governor's powers, because I believe we were in a health crisis, a pandemic. And this should not be a governor who's vying for an Emmy on TV. This should be a health department ruling. And so what happened was this last week, the legislature in both houses passed an amendment to that emergency provision of last year. We basically repealed it and said, okay, going forward, no more new directives from the governor.
And the governor signed this too.
And the governor signed the legislation.
Powers.
Correct.
Was this because of everything else going on around him? Might there have been pushback from the governor if these scandals weren't going on where he might?
I don't know. That could very well be. But I believe the legislation, and I voted for this one. This legislation says no more new directives. You can continue the old directives for 30 days at a time, but you've got to work with the legislature on continuing them. So you can continue them, but you've got to give us notice. Why are you continuing them? And you've got to give us notice in the legislature by a simple resolution of both houses, not a law requiring the governor's signature, but a simple resolution of both houses can overturn any continued directive that he wants to keep going for another 30 days. So he's really restricted his powers.
If he explains to you what he wants to do.
Exactly. And one of the complaints we've had is we've seen a lot of things that appear to be conflicting directives, directives that don't seem to have been based on science and fact. At least explain to us why a school is still closed, but you can have the wrestling team wrestling. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Or why wrestling and not football, or vice versa? These are little simple data. We don't want to make these decisions. The legislature is not equipped to distinguish between football and wrestling. Okay, that's not what we do. But we, on behalf of the people, demand an explanation of what's the logic here. Okay, our constituents are saying, what's the difference between closing a restaurant at 10 o'clock and closing it at 11 o'clock? Now, I understand that the numbers show that there's more likelihood to be congregation at the bar, socialization at the bar, fewer masks at 11, 12 o'clock at night than when the family's sitting around having dinner at a restaurant at 7 o'clock at night. That the tables can be separated, there's less mingling, and so it's safer from the point of view of transmission of COVID. But the governor doesn't explain it that way. Okay, so what's going on here, Governor? That's why we want you to justify going forward what it is you're doing. That's another thing that's diverting us from the budget. Now, we haven't taken out time from the budget to do this. We've just added time to our conferences. So rather than a 4-hour conference, we're now in a 6 or a 7-hour conference after the session.
This leads to the question of Andrew Cuomo and the position he's in right now. How can he effectively help you and the legislature put a budget together? How compromised is he? April 1st is 3 weeks away. Today is Wednesday, March 10th. Should he step aside and maybe have Kathy Hochul, the lieutenant governor, step in for the executive branch?
Look, that would be a compromise, and I certainly would be comfortable with that. I think he is a distraction, and he's distracted. He really needs to step out of the way. Look, once again, he gave us a deceptive budget and an austerity budget. And I'm choosing my words carefully here because he is using federal funds in various places to substitute for state funding.
But doesn't this happen in all budgets? You hear about New York City doing this in other areas and municipalities.
Not the same way. Not the same way. You know, you have to look carefully, and you will see that the governor says he's increasing education aid. Okay, but he's using federal money to increase education aid. And since the federal government prohibits the use of its money for education as a substitute for state money, that was one of the little things they put in. What the governor has done is put in a pandemic credit. So he lists, let's say X school district is supposed to get $100,000 from the state. So he says the X school district is going to get $110,000 from the state. I've increased your revenue. Okay? But then if you go down, you'll see there's a credit. And the state is only going to get $95,000, not $110,000, not even the full $100,000. How did he do that? Well, he figured out that that community is getting, that school district's getting $10,000 from the feds directly. So he's going to reduce state aid through this magic undefined number by 15. Now, why 15 rather than just 10? Well, because he's also found some other things that he's now going to take back to the state. So this whole complicated formula, the layman looks at this and says, what's going on here? Right. You know, it's supposed to be 110, you're getting 95. Well, the governor's made certain adjustments in state aid, which he justifies by saying the state doesn't have the money, so therefore we're going to take back 10% of what we normally give you, and we're going to rearrange the funding formulas where there used to be reimbursement for certain things. We're now not going to reimburse you anymore. You're going to pay for them yourself.
Now, we also hear, too, talk that the governor is now saying that despite all the money we expect to get from the Biden administration with this new COVID bailout package, he still wants to raise taxes now because we need more. Wasn't the talk that we wouldn't have to raise taxes?
Well, you see, he again is acceding. He's acceding to the pressure from the legislature that is saying we should not be using the federal monies to replace state monies. If you take $10,000, take that situation I'm talking about.
Right.
If you were to give that school district 110 this year, next year you won't have the federal money. So now it'll be a cut and there'll be pressure to raise the state contribution to $110,000, which, by the way, it probably should be at, because the governor has put in austerity budgets for years, and so every one of our school districts is underfunded from the state. So that should be. But he's saying we want to do, you know, we have to raise, he's acknowledging that those of us who are saying you should use the federal funds for one-time needs. So he's now acknowledging that. Now, he was not acknowledging that before. See, again, I'm talking about the slippery, deceptive budget, the shell game. He was early on saying we were going to increase taxes on the very wealthy, but if you read the fine print, it wasn't really a permanent increase of tax on the wealthy. There were tax credits they were going to get. There were other things so they could get the money back. It was very complicated. We're basically saying, and most of us in the legislature are saying, look, some people have done very well in this pandemic, okay?
Right, no doubt.
Most of the rest of the world is not doing so well. Poor people are really hurting. The middle class is getting by. Some people in the middle class are doing a little better. Some people in the middle class are doing a little worse. By and large, the middle class is just getting by. But some people at the top have been doing extraordinarily well, whether they're selling masks, whether they're getting contracts to from the state to do special equipment, or just because they're in the business of doing things like Zoom, etc. The economy has shifted, and some people are doing very well. We want to tax those people who are doing very well. If you're making over $1 million a year in this environment, you can pay more in taxes. If you're making 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, you can pay a lot more in taxes to help the rest of the community. And what that does is it allows us to use the federal money for the purposes it was intended, to make up for the losses from the pandemic, to pay for the extraordinary expenses that the school districts, the hospitals, the nursing homes, the schools for people with disabilities, whatever, our school districts, all of them should be reimbursed for their extraordinary expenses of the last year. School districts shouldn't have to raise property taxes just to cover last year's costs. That's what the federal monies are for. And we should take some of that money and set it aside and say, you're going to have to pay for protective equipment for next year. You're going to have to change the filtration systems next year, et cetera. Let's use the rest of the federal money for those one-time costs. Now, let's go back to our recurring costs. We have to pay for schools every year. We have to pay for other things every year. Those are the things that we have to raise the taxes for. The governor still hasn't come to that. He's still using this deceptive language about, whatever. I'm not even sure where the governor is on this stuff. The rhetoric is nice, but you've got to read what the fine print is to understand really what his point is. He's very good at maneuvering, very good at making the public think he's on their side. He brags about the budgets all the time, but it's not his budget that he brags about. It's our budget, the ultimate budget that he brags about, the stuff that we force him to put back in. He runs around the state handing out checks. Well, he doesn't have any of those items in the original budget. I mean, he's cutting out, for example, in my own district, we have New York Medical College has a center of excellence. It concentrates on disaster medicine, in training first responders on how to respond to things like the pandemic. Last year, the governor cut the money out of the budget. We put it back in. This year, he cut the money out of the budget. We're going to put it back in. And there's no question he will go around to the centers of excellence in the state and talk about, how great it is that the state is helping them. So, he doesn't talk about the fact that he cut the money out, right? So it's deceptive, and it's an austerity.
Play this shell game, saying that I'm doing this for you, New York State. Then he comes to you and says, cut this money out, especially medical money that we need for health research, et cetera, during a pandemic. Why would he do this?
Well, all the governors do this. They all want to pressure the legislature to put back the necessaries, so the legislature doesn't have any money to put back the things we'd like to have. So every year we're putting back necessaries. We're fighting to preserve 95% of what was in last year's budget, and every year it cuts back. He's done the same thing with Medicaid. People think that Medicaid is health care for poor people. No, Medicaid is now the basis for most of the medical system, the healthcare system in the state of New York. Okay, the governor has shifted everything to Medicaid. Anything he possibly can gets put in Medicaid, and so the federal government shares in the cost. And the governor keeps cutting back, which means so that the state's 50% is less, but we're also giving up 50% by the federal government. So, and who's suffering from this? Well, it's people with disabilities. If you are a person who needs services from the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, you can't get those services unless you qualify for Medicaid. And to qualify for Medicaid, you have to be in poverty. And so that means you've got to shed all of your assets, and then you have to live at a poverty level to get OPWDD services or to get mental health services. Why should that be the case? Why should people not be able to live at a middle class level? Why should they have to shed those assets or be discouraged from working just to get the needed health care that they can't afford otherwise?
Westchester Assemblyman Tom Abinanti, 92nd District, representing the town of Greenburgh, many of the river towns along the Hudson, and part of the town of Mount Pleasant. Tom Abinanti, after all of your criticisms of Governor Andrew Cuomo, the nursing home scandal with regards to COVID, the sexual allegations, the sexual harassment allegations, now the new story from Brandon Lyons, Albany Times Union this week, about some things that seemingly have gone wrong with the construction and the operation of the new Tappan Zee Mario M. Cuomo Bridge. Would you support impeachment of Andrew Cuomo if he does not resign?
I am not going to rule it out, but I think at this moment it's a distraction. I believe that we have to work on the budget. We have a whole series of nursing home bills that we're working on to clean up the mess at the nursing homes, and we're working on the pandemic. I am hopeful that the governor doesn't force us to make that choice, that the governor voluntarily leaves. I think it's in his best interest to leave, and it's in the best interest of the state of New York for him to leave as soon as possible, or at least to step aside until we hear that report. He's saying, let's wait for the report from the Attorney General. Well, fine, Governor, step out of the way. You are a distraction and you are distracted. So if resign, or at least get out of the way so that we can move forward with the people's business. Don't put us in the situation where we have to deal with the issue of whether to impeach you. Every day it seems to get worse. Every day it seems to be more disclosures. And the way the response is to attack the people who are making the disclosures. That doesn't give us any confidence at all that your position is correct.
All right, now there's talk also, too, about the governor's book deal, which occurred last summer when all these COVID death numbers were racking up and the governor had the opportunity to provide the correct numbers and his administration decided not to. Should that book deal be looked into and investigated, as some say as well, that maybe he fudged those numbers to make himself look good enough to be able to get this supposed seven-figure deal?
Well, that's a very interesting argument by some of my colleagues. I'm waiting to see what happens, but so far the governor has not responded. It's not enough to just say no, okay? It's not enough to just say, no, you're wrong. That's not an answer. Come back with something and show us something different. If you're in the middle of promoting a book that says you did a great deal and you held down, you did a great deal for senior citizens and you held down the numbers, and that's what your book says, and all of a sudden, the numbers are coming out not so great, and you suppress those numbers, well, what's the logical conclusion? The logical conclusion is you're benefiting by misleading the public, and you're actually monetarily benefiting by misleading the public.
There's also talk about how did he get the ethics approval from the State Ethics Commission to be able to go through with this book deal, and when you talk to his office, his legal counsel, about providing the copies of the documents and the contract that was signed with the book company, with the publisher, supposedly they can't find this paperwork now. Meantime, the publisher has turned around and said, okay, no more promotion of this book, no reprint of the hard copy edition of this book, and they're not going to put it into a soft copy as they had planned to very soon as well. So with all this in there, does this make us kind of
It doesn't give us confidence in that the governor is actually working on behalf of the people of the state of New York. That is a conflict. Look, we've seen this before. I think the Republicans are being hypocritical on this, if I can get a partisan shot in there. We Democrats applied the same standard to Donald Trump that we're applying to Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
The Republicans are attacking Cuomo, but they're still standing by Trump. And if you take a look, many of these things that we're talking about are the same things that Donald Trump did. And in spades, I guess, Donald Trump he did far more worse things, but it's the same standards, it's the same principles. If you're going to say that a lowly assembly member has to leave upon an allegation of misconduct and there's zero tolerance, well, Governor, you are the head of the state. You are in charge. There's nobody above you in the state of New York. Okay? If these allegations are thrown at you, then you should leave as well. And let us stop talking about your misconduct. Let us stop talking about whether or not we can believe what you say to us, because your credibility is very low at this moment. So, let us get on with the business of the people of the state of New York. As I said, we're not talking about 1, 2, or 3 assembly members at this point who are kind of, we're the assembly. Let's put it this way. The legislature has power when it acts together. Individual members are not the power. Individual members must work with each other. And if there are a few that are pushed aside, okay, fine. But the governor is the other entity. He is the whole thing. And if he doesn't have any credibility, how does the government function? How do we negotiate? How do we believe when he says this is what the truth is in this agency? This is what's going on in this agency. We cannot believe him. He has lost credibility. That's the issue here. And secondly, the issue is, should we continue to allow working for the executive branch to be a toxic experience? Should our workers, should the people who want to work in the state government be afraid of the head of their entity? You know,
Do
it's
you
like
believe Assemblyman Ron Kim, your colleague from Queens, that he was threatened in a phone call by the governor? And if so, should this be part of the mix in consideration about what the governor should do or maybe not do, or about his future overall?
Look, I believe Ron Kim, okay? But you don't even have to believe all that Ron Kim said. Why would the governor call an assemblyman late at night? He certainly wasn't calling to see how the kid's bath was going, okay? We know the reason he called Ron Kim was to chastise him. Okay, fine. Why would you do that? But the more important thing is not that he called Ron Kim, but that he then carried forward on his threat that he would attack Ron Kim. Why would you attack Ron Kim when Ron Kim was merely leading an effort to clean up the nursing homes?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you attack a single assemblyman who was complaining, rightfully so, that information was not coming out on nursing homes and that the policies at the nursing homes were wrong? Why not deal with the issue? Why not deal with the issue and let the public feel comfortable that you did it right? Why attack Ron? See, that's the governor's style. The governor's style is attack the messenger, cast doubt on the messenger. The problem the governor has now is that he has too many messengers with too many different messages showing that he's done something wrong. You've got 6 women now and a picture showing sexual harassment, okay? That's 6 different messages and 6 different messages. And now we go to the nursing home and you have the numbers that have come out and you have an admission by his own administration.
And now we have the Tappan Zee Bridge report.
Right, and their response is to say, we can't talk about it because the governor has sealed it. Can't talk about it because the judge has sealed the file. Well, who allowed the file to be sealed? What was the position of the state of New York? Did you oppose the sealing of this file? Are you going to go back into court at the request of the legislature to reopen that file up so that we can all see what's in that file?
Or
and
about
why are you using the
in a
sealing?
press conference yesterday, a phoner yesterday, when he was asked a couple of times about releasing the COVID information, the nursing home deaths, a little more on that. Beth Garvey, his special counsel, stepped in and said, we can't talk about that because the feds are investigating. It seemed like another way for the governor to sidestep. At least that's my look at it.
Well, if they cannot talk about it because of a federal investigation, that's an admission they're hiding something. That's an admission that the true numbers will bring some kind of a conviction or at least a prosecution. If they had told the truth from the first, there's nothing to hide. Okay? This is not about a criminal defense case where the defendant is saying, if I talk, I'll just get myself into more trouble. This is a public official who's being asked about public policy and numbers that belong to the public. This is not about where were you on Saturday night when the bank was being robbed. This is numbers belonging to the public. This is public information. There is no excuse at all, except a guilty conscience, to hide information from the public.
Okay, but a guilty conscience is not a crime.
That is correct. And so why is he not disclosing the information? What is going on here? What information are you hiding that you don't want to tell us about? Is this information that somehow will aid the prosecutors to prosecute you? What is going on here? The fact that there's an investigation is not, look, this is very different from the circumstances where you have a person who's committed a personal crime and is being asked about the details of a bank robbery or something like that. We're talking here about give us public information that was compiled by the public employees, that was compiled because there is a public policy involved here. This is public information. There's no reason at all, no excuse to not give us the public information.
Final few minutes with Westchester Assemblyman Tom Abinanti. Tom, in the state budget, there's talk about legalizing marijuana, online gaming, and maybe some other controversial issues as well. With marijuana and online gaming, is this an attempt to raise tax money? Is that the reasoning behind this?
Some people see it as a raising tax money. Others just want to do it, okay? The marijuana, let's take them one at a time. Let's start with online gambling. I personally do not like doing anything that encourages gambling. I know there are a lot of people out there who like to gamble, but I don't believe the state ought to be encouraging them to do that. But we now have to look at the practical world. We are in an online world. Gambling is available to everyone, everywhere. We're no longer just talking about the guy standing on the street corner who takes some money, and if you win, maybe you'll get your money. If you lose, he'll be knocking on your door with a couple of big guys asking for the money that you owe him.
You can't even watch a Rangers game anymore without FanDuel coming up and, hey, bet on the over-under for goals scored in this game or this period, and that's gotten out of hand.
Exactly. So we need to, number one, control this, and number two, guarantee that the state gets its piece out of this, and number three, provide people with a legal way, a safe way to gamble. As I said, I'm not crazy about encouraging gambling, but it seems the people who want to gamble are going to gamble. And so I'm willing to consider these. I want to make sure that it's done constitutionally. There's a prohibition in our Constitution of gambling, except certain types of gambling. And so we have to be very careful that we do this legally, constitutionally, and we have to do it safely. So yes, we can raise some money on this, which I think is helpful in this time. But there's also some social reasons for doing this that we really need to try to give people who want to do this a legal, safe way to gamble without having to go down to the street corner or having to get involved in some of these other schemes. Plus, they can just go across
to deal with Benny the bookie, right on the street.
Exactly, and they could just go across the Tappan Zee Bridge as long as it's safe. I don't think there's any question that it's safe at the moment, but just go across to New Jersey and open up your phone and you can gamble in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably going to be moving forward in some way, shape, or form. Now, marijuana has been an issue for a long, long time. I have always been very supportive of medical marijuana. So my main concern here is to make sure that we do nothing to impair the ability of these companies that are in the medical marijuana field to progress, to move forward, to make it even more readily available, to have doctors learn how to use marijuana this is not prescribing people sitting in by the fireplace smoking or sitting out on the porch smoking. Right. We're talking here about oils, we're talking pills, we're talking, and the important thing is to make sure that the doses and the quantities are carefully measured and that the products are pure. So I don't want to do anything to impair that. And so that's the way I approach this other issue of adult use, okay? Adult use of cannabis. I've never used it. I have no intention of using it, but there are a lot of people who want to use it. And so they argue that they should be able to do this. It is far less dangerous than alcohol or other substances that people use. They should be able to do it. I believe that they are correct. But again, we have to have it controlled. You shouldn't be calling up your friend to have it delivered to your house. You don't know what the quality of that is. You don't know what's in it. So if those people who want to use it should be able to use it safely, and this state should get some tax from it. There's also a social argument that when you have crimes that regulate behavior, that are victimless crimes, that they get enforced only against certain segments of our community. The poor people, minorities, certain communities. And if you take a look at the numbers, that's borne out. We know that marijuana is used by a wide spectrum of people in our society. Right. There are very few arrests of white middle-class people.
That we've seen, no doubt.
Yes, the numbers are totally disproportionate. Possession of marijuana has been an excuse by police officers to harass young black men. to see if they have marijuana on them. Then they find some marijuana, and now the young black man is in jail and awaiting trial. And so now you've destroyed a life for a
couple of grams of pot, basically.
Exactly, a victimless crime.
Right.
And so there's that social argument as well. So I will support whatever measure comes out after the negotiations between the governor and the Assembly and the Senate. The governor has been very, very conservative on this. He has for a long time resisted it, and he's always come up with a plan that sets up a huge bureaucracy. I think that only the big pharmaceutical companies would be able to comply with. And I don't want to see this, a pharmaceutical company. If we were to say pharmaceutical companies could do marijuana in New York, it would happen like this. The governor would be right there, okay? And you'd have the big push of all these lobbyists. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep this as a local industry, a small industry that's going to help our farmers, that's going to help distribution systems, that's going to help have businesses in our communities run by small entities built out of the community, and that's going to relieve the pressure on some of our communities by the law enforcement authorities who use it to hassle them. So I think there's a lot of arguments. I think there's a lot of arguments on behalf of this. It's just a question of what's the details. It's always a problem of details.
Westchester Assemblyman Tom Abinanti, 92nd District. Thank you for your insight and your time. As always a pleasure through the years to sit down and talk with you. Let's do this again soon.
Yes,
Tom.
John.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Nice to see you again and speak with you, and I look forward to the next time.
Yes, next time I hope comes up very soon. Let's do that. Tom Abinanti here on Westchester Talk Radio, Cup of Joe political show, and we are produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through the spring of 2021. Also, Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon, Park Sterling Realty in Bronxville, and Michael Labriola Landscape Design and Construction in Armonk. Catch all of our Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, Dutchess, Orange, and Fairfield County talk radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.